Sony might be quietly working on its first true PlayStation handheld since the PlayStation Vita. Not a streaming device, not an accessory, a proper handheld that runs games natively. What makes this especially interesting is that this same leak suggests Sony may be finally solving some of the problems that caused the Vita to struggle in the first place. So today I want to break down what this leak actually says, how this would be completely different to the PlayStation Portal, and why Sony might be finally ready to return to full-on handheld gaming, and what I would love to see if this really is the start of a PlayStation 6 era handheld. The information comes from hardware leaker Kepler-L2, who has a solid track record when it comes to AMD and PlayStation related leaks. According to Kepler-L2, Sony is reportedly working on a native PlayStation handheld, often referred to as Project Canis. The key thing here is that this device is not designed around streaming. This would be a handheld that runs games locally using its own hardware. The leak suggests this handheld would use AMD's next generation graphics architecture known as RDNA 5. Now, you might be wondering what that's all about, but just to give you a comparison, this is a big deal because the PlayStation 5 is currently based on RDNA 2. So we are 3 architectures ahead, and you know what that means? More power. Even though this handheld would obviously be far less powerful than a full home console due to the amount of power draw it would have, using a newer graphics architecture means it could still be surprisingly capable when games are properly scaled down. Early rumours mentioned as many as 20 compute units, but Kepler-L2 has since suggested Sony is more likely targeting around 16 compute units. And this decision, I think, makes sense. In handheld form factor, power efficiency and thermals matter far more than chasing raw power numbers that would not translate into real-world performance, especially if your device needs charged every 15 minutes. The reported power target is around 15 watts, which lines up nicely with other modern handheld devices. One of the most interesting details Kepler-L2 mentioned is that Sony has reportedly updated its PlayStation 5 development kits to include a mandatory low power or power saver mode. So it's not up to the devs if they want to use this, they must use this now and have this in their games. This is important because it suggests Sony is actively preparing for PlayStation 5 games to scale down to weaker hardware profiles, just like this Canis handheld. In other words, existing PlayStation 5 games could be adapted to run natively on this handheld, lower resolution, reduced effects, like ray tracing and stuff like that, tighter performance targets, but still running locally on the device. And this is a really big deal because building games with scale in mind massively improves the chances of this device succeeding. This is very similar to what Nintendo realized and they did with the Switch, where they just developed games for the Switch which could be played in docked or as a handheld, instead of developers having to make a completely different game for a separate handheld system like they were doing back in the day when they had the DS consoles, for example. That matters because Sony learned this lesson the hard way with the PlayStation Vita. Now, it's really important to separate this from the PlayStation Portal. The Portal is a streaming device. It relies on your PlayStation 5 or cloud streaming. It lives and dies by your internet connection. Without that, it does absolutely nothing. Actually nothing. That's not an exaggeration. This rumoured handheld would be the opposite. Games would run directly on the device, so you would download them, have them on the device, and you could play them. No streaming required, no Wi-Fi dependency, just to play the games. That does not mean one replaces the other. I would say they are quite complementary and are aimed at potentially different players. The Portal is all about convenience and flexibility about the home. However, you can take it, further afield if you wish. However, it's not designed for that. Now, this handheld would be all about portability and playing games wherever, whenever. And honestly, the success of the Portal Maybe what gives Sony the confidence to try this again, as it's been a long time since the PS Vita was about, it has shown there's a strong audience for handheld PlayStation experiences right now. Whenever we talk about PlayStation handhelds, we have to talk about the PlayStation Vita, as it was the last one we had. The Vita was a brilliant piece of hardware, amazing OLED screen, excellent controls, strong early support from developers, I would say, but it struggled. And not because the idea of a PlayStation handheld was flawed. One major issue was expensive proprietary hardware, especially, the memory cards, which put a lot of people off early on. Sony also experimented with a cellular version of the Vita. At the time, that felt way ahead of its time. Mobile networks were way slower, data plans were expensive, and the idea of always connected handheld gaming was just not really a thing yet. Fast forward to today, and things are very different. Mobile networks are far faster and more reliable, and something like that could actually make sense now. But the bigger problem for the Vita came later on. As the PlayStation 4 gained momentum, Sony's focus shifted heavily towards the home console. Development resources followed that focus. Studios were encouraged to prioritize PlayStation 4 games, and over time, the Vita stopped receiving the level of first-party support it needed to survive and thrive. Without consistent exclusive games later in its life cycle, interest in the Vita dropped, sales slowed, third-party support dried up, and the platform began to flounder. That is not because players did not want a PlayStation handheld, and this is exactly where something like a low-power mode becomes so important. If games made for the PlayStation home console can also scale down and run on a handheld, developers only need to make one game, not a completely separate handheld version or just a completely new game in general for the handheld. That removes one of the biggest problems the Vita faced, where teams had to choose between supporting the handheld or the home console due to limited development resources. Instead of spreading development resources too thin, Sony could support both with the same software pipeline, which massively improves the chances of this new handheld surviving long term. Now, the PSP sold over 80 million units, which proves there was a massive demand for this type of device. So it's hard not to wonder what the history of the Vita could have looked like, if Sony had been able to support it alongside the PS4, instead of effectively choosing one platform over the other. If the Vita had sold anywhere close to PSP numbers, Sony likely would have continued investing in it. More first-party games, longer support, and possibly even a true successor before now. Instead, it's become a cult classic, loved by the people who owned it, but left behind once Sony's attention moved fully to the PlayStation 4. That context is really important when we talk about a potential return to handheld gaming now. Now, obviously, this is still all rumour territory, but if Sony really is building a true PlayStation handheld, here's what I would personally love to see. First off, after having a Switch 1, Switch OLED, and Switch 2, docking support would be awesome to see on this new PlayStation handheld. Being able to drop it into a dock and play on TV, similar to the Switch, would instantly make it more versatile. Second, customization. Changeable cover plates like the PlayStation 5, and I know it's a home console, but something for a handheld like that would be perfect. As people carry it around every day, it might get scuffed up a little bit. And just to show off your personality and style, I would really like that. Third, strong, digital integration, cross-buy between PS5 and PS6 and the handheld would be huge. So you buy a game once and you just play it wherever you want on the PlayStation ecosystem. Fourth, controls and build quality, some proper good sticks on this thing, good ergonomics, and no strange compromises just because it's portable. Give us Hall effect joysticks, please, Sony. And another thing I would really love to see is proper Bluetooth headset support. Being able to pair your own wireless headphones would make a handheld feel far more flexible. And, that said, knowing Sony, I would not be surprised if they still push their own link technology and encourage players to use headsets like the Pulse Explorer and Pulse Elite. But I can dream. Now, I understand why they do that, but if this is meant to be a true portable PlayStation device, giving players more choice with audio would be a big win. Now, physical games are tricky. I would love it in theory, if there was a way to support physical PlayStation games. Heck, even if this thing came out and there was cartridges like the Switch 2, I would be happy. I just love physical games. I think it's so important and beneficial for the consumer. However, I worry that it would just be fully digital. And the other thing that would be cool if they could figure out is if you did buy a physical copy of the game and you have it in your PlayStation 5, you can still play it on the PlayStation handheld, or if you had it in a PlayStation 6, console. Imagine if the dock actually had a disc drive. That would be cool, so it could be in there and then you could still be playing the game. Or I don't know, somebody at Sony, way smarter than me, please figure this out, because physical games for life, people. Let's not have them, disappear forever. And finally, a simple but big one, battery life. I would much rather have sensible performance and, better battery life so you could play games for way longer sessions. And actually, one other thing I did forget, give us a good screen on this. A nice OLED screen would be pretty cool. I think that would keep people happy. I'm not too fussed about high refresh rate. I know a lot of people are, but as long as it's 60 Hz, 60 FPS, which it will be, I think that would be good. Now, as we said, none of this is officially confirmed. This is based on leaks and reporting. Plans can change, but the fact that Kepler L2 keeps bringing this up alongside real technical details now makes it feel more believable than some of the past rumors we've had. However, with all this AI boom just hoovering up hardware, who knows if, that might impact the design here of this PlayStation handheld or even the release date. But we will keep you posted here on the channel as we cover all things PlayStation handheld. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Now, would you buy a genuine, true PlayStation handheld if Sony made one again? Or are you happy with the PlayStation Portal style of approach? Now, YouTube knows you better than you know yourself, so check out this video on screen because YouTube thinks you're going to love it.